Hello everyone, my name is St. Jimmy. Doctor Who is one of my favourite TV shows of all time, and it means a fair bit to me emotionally. But it's also a show which varies quite a bit over time between different series and eras of the show. Therefore the quality of the show also varies quite a bit. So today I'm going to rate every series of the show from lowest to highest. Some quick clarifications, I'm only talking about the modern incarnation of the show, post-2006. I'm not going to rank the classic series because I haven't seen most of it. Which episode I consider part of which series is also a little inconsistent, specifically with Christmas specials, which tend to technically be the zeroth episode of the next series. But usually these episodes feel more in line with the previous series, so I consider them part of that series. Except when I don't, but I'll specify that when it happens. I also consider the 2008 to 2010 specials to be their own series. Alright, let's begin. Number 14, Series 11. I feel really bad for Jodie. This was the first series of the first female Doctor. It had so much writing on it, and it just fell so flat. There's barely any redeeming characteristics here. The companions are bland, the Doctor herself is kind of just a worse version of 10, and the bare-bones series arc that we do have is just completely unnoteworthy. I do like some individual episodes, The Woman Who Fell to Earth, Rosa, The Demons of the Punjab, and It Takes You Away are all at least good, but episodes like Arachnids in the UK, the Battle of Rankoor ab Kalos, and especially that Tsuranga Conundrum are among Doctor Who's worst. Admittedly, there are more good episodes here than bad, and I suppose that could be considered a positive, but as we'll see as this video goes on, I think that of literally every series of the show, so it doesn't really matter. I also don't love the 13th Doctor. She's not bad per se. I just see her as a worse version of Tennant without a whole lot of her own character. But it's not Whittikers' fault. When she's given the opportunity to give a good performance, she gives it. But her character is written with nothing to make her stand out from other Doctors. This series also did the somewhat ambitious thing of having 3 companions. I think this was a pretty poor decision. Not because I think that Doctor Who can ever work with 3 companions, but because this series already has a lot riding on it. It has to introduce a new Doctor, the first female one at that, and an entirely new era of the show. I think 3 companions could be okay in the middle of a Doctor's run, perhaps a 3rd companion adding on to 2 pre-existing ones, but here it is just too much to get done in a reduced episode count from Series 10, and we basically get barely any substantial character development for any of these characters. And the worst part is, it's not Jodie's fault, or the actors who play the companions, or even a lot of the individual episode writers. One thing is wrong. Chris Chibnall and his showrunning is literally responsible for every problem that we have here. But I'll save more of my Chibnall rant for later on. For a rating, this isn't offensively bad, Doctor Who rarely is. It's just a huge disappointment for what should have been a historic series of the show. 3 out of 10. Number 13, Series 7. What on earth were they thinking with this one? This is kind of just 2 series arcs smushed together in an attempt to create one. It doesn't work. Amy and Rory are some of my favourite companions, and the way the series wraps up their story in The Angels Take Manhattan, it's almost insulting. Amy and Rory's story arc was about the 2 figuring out how to be a couple and how to truly love and care for one another. And that story arc was completed before the story arc began. So why are they fighting again? I think you can do old problems resurfacing in a way that just works, but here there's just no good plot or thematic reason for it. We basically just get the same story arc that we've gotten with these 2 at this point several times before. And then, to end these companions' 2.5 series arc, we just zap them back in time? How is that a satisfying conclusion for anything? But you know what, I might be willing to ignore that somewhat if this rushed and nonsensical story was put in to make way for an actually good story. But guess what that replacement story was? Clara and the Impossible Girl. And look, I will admit that the premise of the Impossible Girl is actually pretty cool. A mysterious figure that keeps appearing in a doctor's life with the same face but as different people. It's a really cool idea, and honestly could easily be developed interestingly. But how is this arc developed? What does this arc add to the story? A new companion, and not a very good one. There are 1,000,001 better things you could have done with this story. You could have had this whole thing been some kind of Time Lord shenanigans. Clara could have been the Master, or Susan, or the Rani. Hell, the Doctor could have literally just gone insane, and then that would have been better. They literally went with the most boring resolution to the storyline that they possibly could have. That said, there is more to like here than with Series 11. Matt Smith is great in the role, as always, and I do still like Amy and Rory, even if their arc is really bad. There are also some good individual episodes. I think The Power of Three and A Town Called Mercy are pretty good, and I think Hyde is great. I do think that Smith's Regeneration episode is also pretty good, but I don't particularly like the way they wrap up the Silent storyline. But we do have one big reason why this series is better than the previous. That being, there is one episode that is genuinely one of the best of the show. That being the 50th anniversary special, The Day of the Doctor. This episode is both Tennant and Smith at their best. Hurt and Rose and even Clara are doing pretty fantastic jobs here. And the way this episode handles and resolves the Time War arc for the Doctor as a character is masterful. This is probably the best and most fitting 50th anniversary special we could have gotten. I do wish Eccleston was here, but other than that, yeah. So this is just a complete mess with a few significant highlights. 4 out of 10. Oh boy, now we're going to start pissing people off. Number 12, Series 2. Yeah, I don't really care for Tennant's first outing as the Doctor. I wouldn't say there's a whole lot wrong with it, it's just a lot of meh. First of all, I mean, Tennant is a good Doctor, I do like him in the role, but I actually think he's a little bit overrated. And the reason I'm mentioning that here is if this was an Eccleston or a Smith or a Capaldi series, those Doctors' mere presence would be a benefit just because of how damn good they are in the role. Here, well, Tennant's far from bad, but I really can't say the same. Rose is also just okay. I do really like the housing estate as a setting, and Jackie and Pete are both great characters, but Rose herself is kind of a bit bland. I've never been a big fan of the romance between Rose and the Doctor. And the series arc here is kind of just also eh. I think the Cybermen and the alternate dimension are cool enough ideas on their own, but I don't think the two were particularly well integrated together. For example, Rise of Cybermen and the Age of Steel are by no means bad, but it doesn't seem like they can decide whether they want to be a Cyberman story or a Rose's family in an alternate dimension story. And then, just to put the cherry on top, the finale is also a bit of a mixed bag. Look, the Cybermen and the Daleks have a fight in this one, and the child inside of me does think that's sick, but I'm not sure this finale, especially the Daleks rocking up, was particularly well set up. And then when Rose gets stuck in the other dimension and then we get the I love you stuff, look, I just don't care. And yeah, I don't care about this romance in the first place, but I don't think it's particularly well done here regardless. For positives, there are some fantastic episodes here. The Girl in the Fireplace, The Impossible Planet, and The Satan Pit are all examples. I'm also a rare fan of Love and Monsters. I think that episode is just so charming and fun, even if it's really quite strange. But there are also more flat out bad episodes here than usual. The Idiot's Lantern, Fear Her, Tooth and Claw, and The Christmas Invasion, which I do think is more part of this series than Series 1, are just not good at all. This series, in short, is just painfully average. 4.5 out of 10. Alright, now I get to complain about Chibnall some more. Number 11, Series 13. God, this is a mess, and I'm actually kind of surprised that it is. I've seen another one of Chibnall's shows called Broadchurch, and it's actually a really good serial show. So I was expecting this series to be a lot better than Chibnall's previous two, given that it was a serial series of the show, whereas Doctor Who is usually more episodic. And, well, this is significantly better than Series 11, but I don't think Chibnall brought his Broadchurch game here at all. There are just so many damn plotlines here, and it's not focused on any one of them at all. I don't know why a good chunk of these plotlines are even here in the first place, because all they do is maybe provide a plot convenience in the finale. There are not one, not two, but three series-wide villains here, and only one of them is any good, and she gets murked out of nowhere. Why the hell are Vinda and Di and Belle here? What do they add to the story? The feeling I got when watching this is that whenever Chibnall came across a problem with the story he'd come up with, whether that be a plot hole or a lack of character motivation or maybe something being inconsistent with the lore, he'd just create a whole new character or plotline to fix it. But that just created more problems than it fixed. It creates a mess of interweaving storylines that I don't think most people will be able to follow. And adding to that mess, this series isn't really a serial. I mean, it's more so than Doctor Who usually is, but 3 episodes here are quite self-contained. So often these episodes will have to contend with not just the many series-wide plotlines, but also their own episode plotlines. It's just way too much. Now that said, everything other than that series arc is decent to good. I always felt like in the previous 2 series that the character writing was so bland, which is my main problem with series 11 and 12. But here that problem is far better. I think that Dan is a fantastic companion, and I was really happy whenever I saw him on screen. And Carvanista was also so much fun. I actually yelled in joy when he rocked up and wore the Santarans. Adding on to that, Whittaker is the best she's ever been, and so is Yaz. There's actually good character development between these two. Yaz and 13 get a genuinely well put together story arc, which is something I just cannot say at all for the previous 2 series. The strength of individual episodes here is also decent to good, up until the last 2 episodes, where the immense problems with the series-wide story sort of take over and ruin everything. The Halloween Apocalypse and Once Upon a Time are fun, messy, but fun. War of the Santarans is pretty great, and Village of the Angels is genuinely fantastic. The second best Angel episode behind Blink in my opinion. To summarize, this series is a fun mess. Objectively, I can see that it might be difficult to argue that this series is anything other than bad. This is because that the series arc here is pretty abysmal, which means quite a bit more here given that this series is more serial than the previous series are. But my god, it can be so fun that I can ignore many of its many problems. So I can't say it's good, but I also can't say I dislike it. 5 out of 10. Number 10. Series 8. For a long time this was my least favourite series, despite the fact that Capaldi is my favourite Doctor. And I can definitely see why, after the absolutely massive scope of the previous 7 series, where plotlines often took place on a universal scale and had huge long-term effects, a series primarily based around relationship drama between a companion and some random guy was certainly a change of pace, to say the least. But upon a rewatch, I actually found this series to be much better than I remember. The series arc in question is actually quite well implemented, and the dynamic between Clara, Danny and the Doctor is quite compelling. As such, I quite enjoyed episodes where this dynamic was brought to the forefront, like The Caretaker and Listen. I still don't particularly like Clara as a companion, but I can see what they were trying to do here, and appreciate that I think for the most part they succeeded. I do think the general episode quality here is a bit lower than average for Doctor Who. There's a lot more straight up bad episodes here than usual. In the Forest of the Night is really bad, and Kill the Moon might just be my least favourite episode ever. I do enjoy Deep Breath, solely because of how much I love Capaldi, but objectively I can see it's not a good episode. I know a lot of people who got turned off from Capaldi and from Doctor Who as a whole solely because they didn't like the impression they got from this episode. Like, why are the lizard lesbians here? I don't love them as characters in the first place, but this is literally the last time they ever show up. I have no idea why Moffat liked them so much that he brought them in for the grand reveal of a new Doctor. And as much as I at least respect the series arc between Clara and Danny, I don't think the finale is all that great either. It's one of these cases where a few unrelated ideas get smacked together and it just doesn't work at all. It takes the really cool afterlife idea and throws the Master into it, which could be okay, but then there's also a really bland and generic Cyberman plot. And then there's the Clara and Danny series arc just randomly interspersed throughout, with varying degrees of success. Missy is my favourite incarnation of the Master, but this is definitely my least favourite of her appearances. There are some very good episodes here though. Flatline and Mummy on the Orient Express are ones that are often talked about, and they are very good. The Christmas special is also pretty good, up until they decide to keep Clara around for an extra series out of nowhere, which is annoying because this is by far the most fitting place for her to leave. Overall, I did enjoy this series, but not a whole lot. 6 out of 10. Alright, time to piss people off again. Number 9, Series 12. A lot of people seem almost emotionally attached to the idea that this series single-handedly ruined Doctor Who. And well, that's for a reason that we'll get into it in a little bit. But I think it's actually pretty okay. Definitely the best that Chibnall has done. What I've noticed is that Chibnall's series tend to do most things competently, but then there's just one huge thing wrong with it, that it's so bad that even a literal child could do better. And in this series, no, it's not the timeless child, it's the character work again. Or that there's basically none of it. I honestly don't know if Chibnall has ever figured out show don't tell. I can think of one instance of character development which extends throughout this entire series, and it's, oh my god, I can't basketball. Oh my god, I can now? In this example, we don't see Ryan in the process of getting better, we just see that he does. We also don't see how the process of him getting better affects him emotionally. This is the most basic character development you can possibly do. You have 10 hours of screen time here, so there's no excuse whatsoever for this being as horribly basic as it is. There are better examples of character development, or at least of character exposition, in individual episodes. Can You Hear Me, an episode which I personally find quite underrated, does have some genuinely well put together stuff in there. And so does The Haunting of Vila Diodati. But guess what these two episodes have in common? They weren't just written by Chibnall. He had help. The only episodes in the main series with good character development are the ones where Chibnall had help. There is some better character work in the Christmas special, Revelation of the Daleks. The best Chibnall's ever done in Doctor Who in my opinion. But we should have gotten this all the time throughout the last two series, not at the very end of these two characters' arcs. It's just too little too late. But to be honest, everything else here is for the most part solid. I actually think the strength of individual episodes here is decent to good for Doctor Who. Spyfall is, in my opinion, the best series opener that we've had since Series 6, especially the first part. Fugitive of the Jadoon has one of the funnest twists I've ever seen in a Doctor Who episode. The only episode I'd consider straight up bad is Orphan 55, which is something everyone agrees on. And the finale. I really like Sacha Dhawan's interpretation of the Master. It's by no means my favourite, but for a simple, pure evil interpretation of the character similar to something like John Sim, I think Dhawan's the best we've gotten. I'm so glad we're going to get him again before Chibnall's departure. If there was one thing to keep from this era in RTD's next, it would be Dhawan as the Master. And Whittaker as the Doctor is once again fine. She's never a problem in any series, but she's also not particularly a positive. Fine, alright, I'll talk about the finale now. I think that the last 3 episodes are good. I do quite like the Lone Cyberman, probably Chibnall's most compelling new villain, and then I really like Ascension of the Cybermen as an episode. We get a regular Doctor Who Cyberman story, and despite the fact that the looming Timeless Child plotline doesn't really have that much to do with the Cyberman plotline, here I mind it less because the way they introduce plot elements here are meant to be confusing and out of left field, slowly preparing us via mere implication to the gigantic plot twist of the next episode. And then that plot twist. Look, to be completely honest, the Timeless Child doesn't really bother me. I don't think it's a particularly good twist, and I do agree that it would have been better if the Timeless Child was the Master instead of the Doctor. But for me, this twist doesn't really change anything. The fact that there was more of the Doctor's adventures before Doctor Who began is kind of just something I can accept without caring at all. I know the problem that a lot of people have with it is that it negates the first Doctor's story arc. And that might be true. I haven't seen the first Doctor much at all. To be honest, I'm not sure a lot of the people making this argument have either. And the plot implications on previous story arcs don't really bother me that much either. Doctor Who has always had a very loose canon, as a wacky time travel show probably should. It wouldn't be possible to stay internally consistent with nearly 60 years of convoluted time travel crap. In fact, they intentionally don't. Doctor Who showrunners have literally said that they will, every few seasons, find an excuse to change the Doctor Who world in any way they like, just to make their stories make sense. You can see this if you look even for a second. How many times have the Daleks or the Cybermen invaded Earth? How many of those times have people remembered them invading Earth all the previous times? Usually they don't. With Doctor Who, I think trying to adhere to a strict canon would actually be detrimental to the show. I don't think it's possible, and I think to try would greatly hamper creative freedom. So if showrunners want to do crazy universe-altering plot twists, I say we let them. Now, that doesn't mean this particular plot twist is good. In fact, at this point, it looks like it won't amount to anything at all. So the problem here is not with the twist itself, just that never substantial was ever really done with it. And to be honest, that puts the Timeless Children episode itself in a weird position for me. On the one hand, it could have been the beginning of a really cool story, and I don't really think there's anything wrong with the story told thus far. On the other hand, nothing was ever done with this plotline. Flux barely touched it. To be honest, I kind of just lean on giving this episode itself a pass. I don't think the problems I have were actually caused by it. Anyway, I'm sick of talking about this. This series gets a 6.5 out of 10. Number 8. The 2008 to 2010 specials. Alright, this is the shorter series, so this will be the shorter section. Yeah, this isn't bad at all. I can't give it too much credit because it's literally 5 episodes long. So it doesn't really have as many opportunities to go wrong as a longer series would. But what we have here is 3 episodes that are fine, they're okay, and then 2 that are among the best that Doctor Who has to offer. Tennant continues to be good as the Doctor, but not amazing, and the closest thing we have to a companion here is Wilf, who is really good in this series. What I will give this series credit for is probably my favourite series arc that we've seen. It's somewhat of a subversion of the generic mystery box arc that we always get. Basically what it tends to be is we have a repeated line, or a name mention, or a mysterious location shown throughout a series. And then we get whatever it is, revealed, and it tends to be something massive, like the Master returning, or the Master returning. Here we get this, he will knock 4 times and the Doctor will die, line repeated. At first we think this is the same territory that we've tread every series thus far. In fact, we think we get the grand reveal of what this means. And it's the Master returning, now with Palpatine powers. And then we have our grand finale. The Master turns everyone on Earth into him using a nuclear reactor. The Time Lords literally try to destroy the universe, the Doctor saves the day, and then, just as we think everything is done, just as we start to feel as everything is okay, we get this. Wilfred is stuck in a nuclear reactor. The Doctor goes in, sacrificing his life. He will knock 4 times, and the Doctor will die. It is such a simple series arc, but it is so damn effective. Yeah, anyway, this series is pretty good. I rate it a 7 out of 10. Alright, now for the opinion that'll piss the most people off. Number 7, Series 4. This is just about everyone's favourite series, and I do understand why. There is some legitimately fantastic stuff here. Donna is, as just about everyone agrees, probably the best companion that the show has ever had. The dynamic between her and Tennant is just about perfect. This is partially because after 2 companions who are just completely in love with the Doctor, Donna is a wonderful breath of fresh air. This series also contains the best continuous run of episodes that the show has ever had. Silence in the Library and Forest of the Dead is, in my opinion, the best 2-parter that the show has ever had. And then both Midnight and Turn Left are also among the show's best. But this series has 2 major problems which set it back, without which it would be easily among the show's best. First of all, the first half of this series is, in terms of quality of individual episodes, painfully average. Nothing's offensively bad. I do quite like Planet of the Ood, for example, but it's just a solid 7 episodes which are quite a slog to get through. Tennant and Donna do make it much more bearable, but it's still really not great. Second of all, now, for my hottest, most controversial Doctor Who take ever. The finale of Series 4, The Stolen Earth and Journey's End, are truly, horribly, offensively awful. What we have here is basically nothing but fan service. Now, I don't actually mind fan service. I actually don't mind where entire plots are intended to be fan service. For example, I quite like Avengers Endgame, but here's the difference between Endgame and this. In Endgame, the characters and locations that we see actually add things to the story. Sure, it is fan service that we go back to the most iconic movie in the MCU, but there are 3 Infinity Stones there, so it does make perfect sense to go back to that specific time. It adds to the plot and the story that we see this fan service, and then each character arc that we see on those adventures also makes sense within the context of the story. It makes sense that we see Tony Stark interact with his father as he goes back to the past, not only within the world as it has been set up, but for the storyline as a whole, given Tony Stark's ultimate fate. Now, keeping all that in mind, why is Martha in this finale? I can buy that she'd go to the Doctor when the world ends, that all makes sense. But what does she actually add to this story? She tries to blow up the Earth to save the universe. Now, that might be cool if it amounted to anything at all. If Earth blew up, that might actually make for a really cool series of specials. But of course, Doctor Who is a family-friendly show, so we can't do that. So this is just literally here for no reason. It has no effect on the plot, and it's just a complete waste of time and ultimately achieves nothing. This is more or less the case for every companion that we see here. I guess it makes sense why they go to the Doctor, but what do they add to the story? Basically nothing. The only 2 I can excuse is Donna, just because she's the companion, and Rose, because of the romance between her and Ten, and also because she's been trying to contact him all series. I also find it very difficult to buy the Daleks as a universe-ending threat after the previous series butchered them into comical absurdity. The characters all act like it's hopeless when Daleks are revealed as the villains of the story, but we as the audience don't feel this hopelessness, as we don't see the Daleks the same way that these people do. We also get an awful cliffhanger at the end of this episode. I do think the fact that the Doctor gets shot as soon as he's reunited with Rose is a bit too melodramatic, but then he regenerates. Doctor regenerating in the middle of a two-parter finale, especially one with such high stakes, would be the coolest thing ever. But once again, we take a cop-out resolution. The Doctor regenerates into himself using his hand that was cut off. It's so boring and lazy. And then this leads to what is ultimately the biggest problem with this story. And I will acknowledge that this is partially because I don't like this plotline in the first place. But, and I believe that this is a pretty reasonable position, I think there is one way to end a romance between a regular human and a Doctor, by having them both accept that it could never work. And this story shows exactly why this is the case. Look at how convoluted the story has to be to accommodate literally any other resolution. We literally have to create a human clone of the Doctor who appears because I don't remember or care why, because their hands had regeneration energy, because the Doctor used it to regenerate into himself, which is something that we've never seen before, which is kind of awful. But anyway, that was because the Doctor got shot by a Dalek after he gets reunited with Rose, who was stuck in another dimension but came back at the perfect time for the Doctor to get murked. It's a ridiculously convoluted plot to achieve literally the polar opposite ending necessitated by a romance which is painfully average to begin with. I hate these episodes with a greater passion than I hate any other Doctor Who episode. And sure, there are objectively worse episodes, but my god, this is so fucking bad. And what makes it worse for me is that most people seem to really like these episodes, and I just feel like I'm screaming into the void about this because I do not know how. Now, the finale doesn't ruin the series or anything. I still enjoy most episodes here, but it would still be much better if the series ended in a satisfying way. For a rating, 7 out of 10. Number 6, Series 3. For a while this was my favourite series, and I can definitely see why. The finale of this one is absolutely hype, and we have some classics like Gridlock, Human Nature and the Family of Blood, and of course Blink. But over the years my opinion on this one has soured consistently. I still quite like it, but I just have a few issues with it. First of all, look, Martha is very meh for me. She's not awful at all, and to her credit, she probably has the best story arc of the Russell T Davies era for any companion. It's nice to see a companion who was in love with the Doctor, and who wouldn't be, realize the impossibility of a relationship with this man and make the incredibly mature decision to leave this incredible adventure to save herself the huge, long-term heartache. It's some advice I would like to see other companions maybe take. That said, I kind of just find her character very boring while on screen. It seems like all of her actions boil down to two character traits. She's intelligent, and she's got the hots for the Doctor. That latter one often goes on to Martha comparing herself to Rose when the Doctor mentions her, which is of course a dynamic I don't particularly like. Should also mention a fair few bad eggs here. The Lazarus Experiment and 42 are certainly questionable. The Dalek two-parter single-handedly ruined the Daleks for the remainder of the Russell T Davies era for me. So yeah, really not good. I will give this series credit for something huge though, and that is that this finale is intense, high-stakes Doctor Who at its best. Captain Jack returns at the best time he possibly could have. Derek Jacobi gives an incredible performance in Utopia. Then that master reveal. Oh, that master reveal. It's the single best reveal that the show has ever done, and it's so good that the show has been trying to do more master reveals ever since, and none of them have been as good. Then the Master becomes Prime Minister of Great Britain, and oh my god, what an interestingly ridiculous premise for an episode. The danger that our heroes are in this one is so well conveyed. It's a feeling I somewhat rarely get in media, at least done so well. Then when the Master inevitably goes full Joker mode and just takes over the world with his alien army, because of course he does, it makes for a great penultimate cliffhanger. Then, the last episode, it does such a good job of making everything feel so hopeless. The dystopian setting feels so visceral, especially for the little that we see of it. And then, well, the ending's kind of bad, to be honest. The Doctor, he just becomes Jesus. I don't know how Russell T never learned about the phrase Deus Ex Machina, which basically just means that you end your story by introducing something of great power at the last second to easily and quickly wrap up a story. but this is the quintessential example of that. But yeah, apart from that, this finale is fantastic, and this series is also pretty good. Slightly better than Series 4, I would say. For a rating, 7.5 out of 10. Number 5, Series 9. So this one's a bit of a weird one. Its lows are pretty abysmal, but its heights are the best the show has ever had, which makes it a little hard to rank. I'll start with the lows. Yeah, look, the big one's the companion. Clara has one character trait. She's pretty smart. That's about it. At least with Martha, her character arc was good. Clara doesn't even have that, at least not in this series. And I think Clara is definitely at her worst here. Until the very end of the series, she doesn't really actually have anything to do with this series arc. So she's just here simply so the Doctor can have a companion. Now, I might not mind that if I actually like the companion, but I don't. Another issue here is the series arc, which is just a mess. The hybrid is a nonsensical plotline which doesn't amount to anything. And then Maisie Williams' character this season isn't usable at all, and all the episodes she's in, except Face the Raven, are average at best. Which is a shame, because I think a character which the Doctor made immortal, and who lives all throughout history, occasionally crossing paths with him, is a really neat idea. But of course this character also amounts to nothing. I'm going to go on a rant about havnt, so I'll leave that part of the series arc for later. The only other questionable episode here is Sleep No More, which is actually kind of a weird one for me though. I find its fundamental idea, that being a found footage story where the specific choice of characters' perspectives that we see throughout the episode are actually an aspect of the story itself, really interesting. In fact, I like it so much that I can almost forgive its very questionable execution. Almost. But all the rest of the episodes that I haven't mentioned so far are quite good to excellent. The Magician's Apprentice and The Witch's Familiar are the best Dalek stories since Bad Wolf and The Parting of the Ways. God damn, I have some hot Doctor Who takes. Under the Lake and Before the Flood are a very fun story. I like stories which jump to different places in a location's history. It's something you'd think Doctor Who would do more, being the quintessential time travel show, but weirdly enough it doesn't. The Zygon Invasion and the Zygon Inversion are also really good, especially the latter half of the second episode, where Capaldi gives this best speech that has been ever given in all of Doctor Who, and dare I say, one of my favourites in all of fiction. This is my favourite incarnation of the Doctor, and he doesn't disappoint at all in this series. In fact, I think Capaldi in Series 9, and as we'll see, Series 10, is the best the Doctor has ever been. And then it's time to talk about Heaven Sent. Heaven Sent is the best Doctor Who episode. It is an absolute marvel. In writing, in acting, in themes, in filmography, in just about every aspect I can think of. I don't actually want to get much into it because I think I want to make a whole video on this episode. It's truly amazing and deserves more than a small section of a larger video dedicated to it. What I will say here is the central theme of Heaven Sent is the Doctor overcoming his grief over the loss of Clara, and accepting that no matter how hard it was to accept, Clara was gone, and wasn't coming back. I mention this because, well, now let's talk about Hell Bent. Everyone, let's sit down and imagine what the worst possible way to follow up something like Heaven Sent is. Is it A, the Doctor goes back in time and stops Clara from dying, thus ruining all the character development from the previous episode? B, the Doctor has to go through the exact same realization that he can't save Clara all over again, making this episode ultimately completely pointless. C, making the Doctor forget everything about Clara so that the Doctor doesn't even have to deal with this grief, meaning that both these episodes are completely inconsequential. D, making Clara immortal so that the Doctor doesn't have to deal with this ever again. Vote now on your phones. Have you voted? Well, you're wrong, no matter what you chose, because guess what? Guess fucking what? The correct answer is all four. Stephen Moffat somehow managed to screw up in all four ways. I just don't understand. B and D don't even sound like they should be able to happen at the same time, but somehow he does it. somehow he manages it. I'm gobsmacked. The only reason this one doesn't make me as mad as Stolen Earth Journey's End is because most people seem to think this is pretty bad as well. It doesn't ruin the series, or thank God even Heaven Sent. I just pretend it doesn't exist, to be honest. This series is probably a 7.5 out of 10 as well. Number 4, Series 6. This is the best series of Doctor Who, up until the second half. It's actually so disappointing that the second half of Series 6's series arc is as much of a letdown as it is. What we have here is actually the most hyper Doctor Who series arc has ever been. First of all, The Impossible Astronaut and Day of the Moon are the best series openers in all of Doctor Who. I love when this show does crazy gutsy stuff like show the Doctor literally die and then reveal that that was hundreds of years down the line on the Doctor's timeline, and then base your entire series around the apparent inevitability of this event. I wish Doctor Who did this kind of thing more. I think we need a good hype series arc. Keyword on good. A Good Man Goes to War also follows along in the same way. It successfully continues to manage its level of interest, and I think the plot twist that River Song is Amy and Rory's daughter is well managed. And then we get Let's Kill Hitler and the wedding of River Song. And I mean, they're okay. I wouldn't say they're bad. It's just that we already have a lot of interesting ideas in this series arc, and we don't need more, but they try and put more ideas in. It just doesn't fit too well. For example, I think the idea that all of time is happening all at once is really fun and off-the-wall bonkers in a great kind of Doctor Who way. But I think you'd need a whole episode to explore it because we have to contend with this series arc here as well, and I don't really think the two fit together. But yeah, these ideas are pretty good, and even though they're not implemented too well, I can still get enjoyment out of them. Oh, and the Silents are great. I wish that the creatures that we call the Silents got more acknowledgement in the canon of great Doctor Who villains, because they are really compelling in this series. Except when the answer to the whole silence will fall when the question is asked question is literally, what is the Doctor's name? So, Doctor Who. Like, it's so dumb, but it's kind of funny as hell. Other than the series arc, to be honest, everything else here is great. I love Matt Smith as the Doctor. He's so fitting for these kinds of crazy story arcs, so he continues to be my second favourite incarnation of the character. Amy and Rory continue to be among my favourite companions here as well, and their story arc actually makes sense and is not a reiteration of previous series like in Series 7, so they get full time to shine as the great companions that they are. In terms of individual episode quality, to be honest, the worst episode is Let's Kill Hitler, which is average. Everything else is average to fantastic. I love the Rebel Flesh and the Almost People. It's a super underrated two-parter. The Girl Who Waited and the God Complex are super wacky, but again in a perfect kind of Doctor Who way. And you know what? I'll say it. I like Closing Time. Yep, I like the James Corden episode. And look, I think James Corden's solo work is awful. But I just really love the idea that the Doctor just is participating in normal day-to-day life in this episode, and I think the pure alienness of the 11th Doctor makes him the perfect incarnation to pull off such a story. I just have a lot of fun with this episode. So, the worst issue here is that this series has too many good ideas, except for one of them, and doesn't know what to do with them. That's a pretty good issue to have in my opinion. So, 9 out of 10. Number 3, Series 5. Okay, now we get to the properly good stuff. Now we get to the stuff that makes Doctor Who worth watching in the first place. Honestly, a lot of what I just said about Series 6 applies here as well. 11 is great, Amy and Rory are great, so this just has all the same ingredients that the next series does, but also with a competently told series arc. And dear God, I think this might be the best series arc in all of Doctor Who. This series just does so many things that previous and following series would never do. Have the TARDIS literally explode, and then we see its wreckage from the future. Have Rory literally get deleted from existence. Even just little things end up being relevant. Like, hey, isn't it a bit weird that Amy's parents are never mentioned? I mean, surely we would hear something about them. It's something insignificant that I'm sure most people forgot about watching the series. I know I did. And then it's revealed that that's because the crack in time literally deleted them from existence like it did Rory. This is the best kind of twist in my opinion, where we don't expect it, but looking back, it makes perfect sense. A similar thing is done in the Weeping Angel two-parter. We get a weirdly short scene between Amy and the Doctor with some unusual dialogue. It's really out of place for this episode. We might just dismiss it as a slightly odd decision made. Again, I know I did. But it's not. The scene is different because it's not the Doctor we've seen in the episode thus far. It's the Doctor from the future on a timey-wimey adventure. For me, it's this little attention to detail which makes this the best series arc, and it's placed in really perfect timey-wimey ways, like honestly a time travel show should always do. I don't know why Doctor Who doesn't as much, because it's so perfect for this show. As for individual episode quality, it's mostly great. The aforementioned Angel two-parter are pretty good Angel stories, and work in the series quite well. The Hungry Earth and Cold Blood are quite fun as well, and the Pandorica opens and the Big Bang are an absurdist and hype time travel show finale done perfectly. But there are 4 near-perfect episodes in this season. The first is Amy's Choice, which is such a perfect blend between wacky time travel science fiction and the character development that have gotten up to this point so far. I always appreciate when shows put a weird esoteric episode in the series like this. They're risky and often don't work, but when they do, they really do. Second is the 11th Hour. If you want to get people into Doctor Who, show them this. This is the perfect introduction to a new Doctor, a new companion, and an entirely new era of the show. And to be honest, the show itself. It's just so well written, and the time travel is used so effectively to introduce the companions and their themes of the series as a whole. I love that they make the 11th Doctor into a fairy tale. It makes so much sense that the people who meet him would view him that way, but we haven't seen much of that to this point. And Smith is the best actor to pull off something like this. Third is, maybe to some people's surprise, A Christmas Carol. This is the best Christmas special, and in my opinion the most underrated episode in the show. It honestly has among the best world building that the show has ever had, and the character arcs of every character here is really fantastic. So the next perfect episode is the James Corden one. I am joking, but I do unironically like The Lodger, for similar reasons to why I like Closing Time. The actual perfect one is, unsurprisingly to most, Vincent and the Doctor. Honestly, Doctor Who hasn't explored mental health enough, but it can also never top this masterpiece. I usually don't care much for historical episodes where all we do is go back and meet a historical figure, but here it's done so effectively. We get a story with themes actually relevant to the historical figure in question. Honestly, this should be the template for all historical episodes of the show. To be honest, the only bad episode here is Victory of the Daleks, which is probably the worst Dalek episode we've ever gotten. But honestly, this episode is the only bad part of the series. For a rating, I'm of the opinion that fiction can never truly be perfect, and I'm not sure it's fair to deduct a point for one bad episode, which ultimately doesn't have much effect on the rest of the series. So I'm a little reluctant, but I've given these for worse, so yeah, 10 out of 10. Number 2, Series 1. Yeah, this is the best Russell T Davies series so far. It might be somewhat surprising that Rosa's most iconic series is up this high given how many problems I've had with her thus far. The thing is, the issues I've had with Rose aren't actually about her while she's on screen. It's about the story and character arc that she's primarily involved in, that being the romance with the Doctor. In this series, sure, that's hinted at a fair bit, but it's not going full force like it does in the later Tennant series. So even though I wouldn't say I like it, I don't think it bothers me as much because the issues that I have with it haven't really surfaced yet. As I've said before, I really like the housing estate as a setting. I think one of the best things a Doctor Who series can do, which it actually doesn't do a fair bit, is have a kind of home base. This is essentially a setting which we go and revisit, oftentimes a companion's home, multiple times a series. And I think this series has the best home base. I think the housing estate works really well, especially because this series goes for a kind of domestic vibe, if you will. Adding to that, I think Jackie and Mickey are perfect for that and also get very well done character arcs. Apart from Rose related stuff, basically everything about this series is really fantastic. Christopher Eccleston as the 9th Doctor is absolutely amazing. His portrayal of the Doctor's darker, more serious side, in this case the management of the Doctor's trauma over the events of the Time War, is probably the best of this in the entire series. His portrayal of the Doctor's more comedic side is not lacking at all either. The guy is really funny and charming. It's so disappointing that Eccleston had as poor of a time acting in the show as he did, because his performance is so good that if he had a full 3 series run of the show, I think there's a really good chance that he would be my favourite Doctor, at least from what we see here. Now, the series arc is pretty basic, just being Bad Wolf being repeated over and over again, as well as exposition around the Time War and the Daleks. If this was in a later series, I'd definitely criticize it, but this is the first plot of this kind in the show, so at this point I would argue that it's quite interesting. Given that almost every series after this uses some kind of mystery box style of storytelling, I would say this series arc became the blueprint for so much that came after it. So I think this series gets some credit for that. Individual episode quality is at worst average, and at best some of the best that this series has to offer. Rose is a fun yet somewhat corny introduction to this series, and to the Doctor Who universe as a whole. Aliens of London and World War III are so stupid, but in the most charming way possible. And then The Empty Child, The Doctor Dances, and Father's Day are also definitely highlights. This series has not just the best, but best 2 Dalek stories in the entire modern show, that being Dalek in the finale, Bad Wolf and Parting of the Ways. Honestly, the worst episode here is The Unquiet Dead, and honestly that's not even bad, it has a fair amount of sweet moments. So yeah, Doctor Who's reboot was just about the best they could have had. 10 out of 10. Number 1, Series 10. I think most people like this series a fair bit, but it's probably a bit of a surprise for it to be a number 1 pick. But yeah, this series does everything right for me. Capaldi is the best Doctor. By far. It's honestly not even close. The man in the role is an inspiration, and is who comes to my mind when I think of the Doctor. I really like the companions here. Bill is honestly the first intelligent companion character that the show has done well. The show has had 2 characters previously where intelligent really seemed to be their only character trait a lot of the time. But Bill is just so much more nuanced than that. She is both very intelligent and kind of stereotypically working class, as in she's not too great at traditional education, or at least she hasn't done much of it in the past. But you can tell she's intelligent nonetheless. It's an archetype of character I wish I saw more. Nardole is also really great. Kind of a stereotypical idiot at times, but again, much more nuanced than that. He's also a genius with a strong, lawful good type of moral compass. He's a comic relief character with just enough nuance for his inclusion to be warranted, while also maintaining the comic relief. The series arc here is mostly based around Missy, who more than solidifies her place as my favourite incarnation of the Master in this series. Her arc of moral reflection and eventual character development is perfectly executed, using the 12th Doctor's strong moral compass to have character interactions between the 2 characters which further the arc. Bringing back the John Sim Master to contrast Missy's character development with the pure evil of the Sim incarnation of the Master works so well, and makes the resolution to Missy's arc so satisfying. So good in fact that Missy is, in my headcanon, the last incarnation of the Master, since that possibility is actually left open. Highlights for this series include the opener, the pilot, which is the best series opener since Series 6 when the series came out. Knock Knock is quite a fun story. Oxygen is great, especially the brave choice of making the Doctor go blind going into a 3-part story. Then that damn 3-parter is so creative and goes through so many different ideas, but unlike Series 6, somehow never feels unfocused, which to be honest is really impressive. And then the finale. I do consider this to be a 3-part finale, with Twice Upon a Time serving as a 3rd part, even if that wasn't necessarily intended. This finale, I would say, is the best in the revived series. It's the best Cyberman story I've ever seen, and honestly is the only one in the revived series which uses them correctly in my opinion. Turning a companion into a Cyberman is such a fantastic and gutsy choice. I'm so glad they were actually brave enough to take it. Capaldi gives the 2nd and 3rd best speeches in the entire show in these episodes as well. It's just so amazing. In short, this series is not just my favourite series of Doctor Who. To be a bit melodramatic, to me it is Doctor Who. It boils down all the reasons I would ever want to watch and enjoy this show into 13 episodes, and I could never ask for more from a series of this show that I love so much. 10 out of 10. Oh my god. This video was long. Did you know I went into this video like months ago expecting it to be like a short project? It's fucking 50 minutes long, and this script was 19 pages. Kinda ridiculous. I'm glad I did it though, although I don't think I will be doing something similar to that again. At least not for a while, because it really did take a lot of time, and it was quite repetitive. I think what I'm going to start doing is once or twice a week I'm going to release like a smaller effort video, and then I'm going to kind of, in the meantime, between these shorter videos, work on a much larger project, and I'm just going to keep releasing those much larger projects. And I think my first one is probably going to be a video essay of some kind, though I'm not sure specifically which one I want to do. I've got a few ideas rattling around in my head. But anyway, next video should have better audio quality. I'm getting a new microphone quite soon because this blue snowball, it's not doing well. It's not doing well for me. Anyway, yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Be sure to like and subscribe, I guess. Anyway, goodbye. Alright, I want to give a shout out to my roommates who all individually showed up on this video at least once, because my walls are paper thin. Thanks guys, really appreciate it. Not mad at all. I'm not, but fuck you.